Good evening and welcome to the Edinburgh Jewish Cultural Centre Live. I'm David Neville and tonight I'm joined by the author J. David Simons to talk about his latest novel, The Interview. So David, good to have you with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's always good to see you, David.
So I'll just say a little bit about you, David, for anyone that doesn't know you and know of your work. So J. David Simons is a Scottish novelist and short story writer. He's worked as a lawyer in Edinburgh, a cotton farmer on a kibbutz, and an administrator for a homeless charity. He's also been a visiting lecturer at Keio University in Japan. And apart from fiction writing, he's also an editor with Blue Pencil Literary Agency and a journalist. Since October 2017, he's lived as a digital nomad, traveling, writing, and working around the world. And he currently lives in Spain. So David, great to see you. I very much enjoyed reading your book. I think just to start off, for everyone that's not read your book, can you tell us briefly about the novel? What's it about? Who your main character is?
Yeah, the interview is, the sort of underlying theme of the interview is about talking truth to power and at the same time talking truth to yourself. So there's kind of two interviews that go on in the interview. One where the interviewer is interviewing somebody else, and one where the interviewer is actually being interviewed. And the main character is called Carl Drummond, and he is actually from Scotland, and he is the grandson of Celia Khan. So if anybody's ever read my second novel, The Liberation of Celia Khan, he actually is her grandson. And Celia Khan was a sort of a feminist and an activist in the 1920s and 1930s in Glasgow. So Cal kind of inherited those sort of values of social justice and so on. And for reasons which I can't really explain without giving too much away, when he's about 17 years old, Cal ends up living in the United States under the auspices of his uncle and aunt. And when he first arrives in the United States, he becomes enamored with the American talk show host, is particularly at that time Johnny Carson, and he always dreamed that he would love to be a talk show host. So when he starts off in America, which is 1980, his uncle, who is his uncle and I have adopted him. His uncle is working in the music video business, producing music videos like not like Michael Jackson, but at the same time as all of that was happening in America with Thriller and so on. And the birth of MTV and cable news network CNN, and he gets involved in all of that and grows up within all of that, eventually rising to the top of his profession, of his chosen profession of being a talk show host. A kind of heavy hitter, not so much entertainment, but kind of a sort of David Frost, Dick Cavett kind of host. And leading up to a very famous interview, which changes his life and forces him to retreat to a cabin in the woods in the American South in Georgia. And that's where we meet him for the first time and where the novel actually begins. So you don't need to read it now. That's kind of the whole thing.
No, there's a lot to get out of reading it. I think I can say, David, that it flits from the present to his past, and we get a kind of build up to this interview. We can't say much about the interview because that would be a plot spoiler. But he's an interesting character because he's built a very successful career in the media, but his private life is more problematic.
Yeah. I think all my characters in all my novels' private lives are problematic. I'm not very sure why, if that's a reflection of anything in my own life, but I like flawed characters, and I like those situations. And I did this with one of my previous novels, An Exquisite Sense of What is Beautiful, where the character has a sort of moral high ground in his public life, but in his private life, it's all in turmoil and so on. And so with Carl's, yeah, his relationships are not particularly successful. That's for sure. And then I mean, we go through his high school experience as well, because he does a year of American high school, which was probably the hardest part for me to write in the novel. And the characters that he meets there in high school end up playing a very important part in his life later on in good and bad ways.
You've got this phrase, high school never ends, which I
Yeah.
think is the title of the first chapter.
First section of the book, yes. High school
Yeah,
never ends.
first section of the book. And as you say, some of the people that he meets then appear later in the book, and they have an input in one way or another into his life and what happens to him. But the bit that's set in the present for most of the book, can you talk about where that's set?
Well, I mean, the present, where he ends up being interviewed in New Mexico. I don't know if anybody who's listening here has ever been to New Mexico. So there's a place in New Mexico called the White Place, Plaza Blanca. And it's where Georgia O'Keeffe used to go to paint. I don't know I don't know if you know how much you know of the artist Georgia O'Keeffe, but she was one of the first real female artists to be recognized in sort of contemporary times, and she influenced Frida Kahlo, for example, and so on. And she had this there's this quite fantastic place in the desert in New Mexico called the White Place, and she would go there and paint. And this place has also quite a profound impact on Cal. And when he has to choose to be interviewed and to tell his own truth, that's the place where he takes the journalist who's going to interview him.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you set quite a sort of time bomb running, because you let us know that something dramatic happened or something happened because of this interview, but you don't tell us for quite a while. But what we know is that he's had to drop out of the spotlight and go, as you say, to New Mexico.
Well, no, he's in New Mexico is where he's doing the interview. He goes to the American South. He goes to Georgia.
Oh, sorry, the American South.
Goes to Georgia to a cabin in the woods and lives a recluse, basically.
And whatever else is happening in his life in this book, I certainly got a sense that he was quite enjoying being out of the spotlight. Maybe not just because of what had happened.
That's a good question, actually. I never thought about whether he was it was kind of a forced retirement. And yeah, he was well, it's like, I think anybody in a way that goes back to nature and he's cut off from the internet and from the mobile phone, and he's living a very sort of mellow lifestyle now. Quite a lonely one, apart from he's got one neighbor who's quite significant for him. But I think he's Although I guess as somebody who was in the spotlight and very famous, I think when he has an opportunity to return to the spotlight, he kind of takes it.
And I think what's intriguing as well is that his one neighbor, who he gets quite close to, also doesn't reveal her background.
That's right. Yeah. She's got her own hidden past as well. Yes. Yeah. As most of us do, in a way.
So there's a lot, of intrigue and to discover. What I want to ask is, what inspired this book? Was there a particular incident or a moment or a phase that made you think this would be good to write about?
Well, I think for me, I mean, I guess where it all started was, where the kind of times that we're living in now, especially for news and journalism, and the whole idea now that we have 24/7 news coverage, and that I think that's made a tremendous difference to our lives from when it used to be at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and that was it, and 6 o'clock. I think used to have news bulletins like 3 times a day, and journalists could really work out what they had to do and learn up on their scripts and the questions that they had to ask, and that doesn't really happen now. Journalists just don't have that amount of time anymore. They have to act very quickly. They have to rush off to some spot somewhere and interview someone, and they don't have the depth really to answer the question, to challenge the interviewee. And I'm sure most of you have had the experience of listening to an interview on the television or on the radio and just think, oh, come on, follow it up. You've got, don't let them get away with that. Make them accountable and so on. And that's just not happening now because, I mean, for all kinds of reasons. But one of them is, I think, that journalists just aren't. They don't have the background. They're not prepared enough. So that if you are talking to a politician, for example, who knows their stuff, it's very difficult to challenge them if you don't know yours. So I just got to the point where I just got sick of these not having these follow-up questions and sort of forcing people to be accountable or to explain what they're doing and so on. So I kind of started off with as I usually do, with a short story. I thought, oh, this will be a good short story. I'll just do I'll create a situation like that. And then of course it kind of started to get a bit of traction, and then it develops, and then suddenly I find that I'm writing another novel, which I don't really want to be doing, but that tends to be what happens. Every time I finish writing a novel, I say, this is my last one. I'm never going to write another. So
why is that, David?
Because it's hard work. It's about a year, it's at least a year and a half out of unpaid labor for a start. It's unpaid work. And, and it's, it's quite a lot to carry around for you've got to carry that story around with you, and you're always thinking about it and so on. And I mean, I'm actually very fortunate, because I have somebody who's willing to publish me, still. I mean, I think if I was with any other publisher, or certainly any one of the major publishers, I would have been dropped a long time ago. I don't have the sales to justify, the big bucks or anything like that. And I mean, I've seen lots of my friends that I've come up with who've started off with quite big deals and so on, and they get tossed aside after 2 novels or something like that. And here I am. I'm just writing number 8 at the moment. And but I'm very lucky. I've got someone who's still who's a loyal publisher, which is very rare in these days. So yeah, but it's hard. It's very hard. It's very hard running out of material.
But I mean, because it does take so much effort and such a long time, there must be a reason why you're compelled to write another novel. And let's talk about the interview. What kept you going? Did you just become more and more intrigued with the characters in it? Because I certainly did as I was reading it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what keeps me going. I mean, I just have to write. I mean, I'm not looking for money or fame or if it happens, fine. But I mean, I just that's what I do. That's what defines me, and I'm very fortunate that it's something I can do, as long as I live, hopefully, and I like telling stories. I'm hoping that, my novels are not like some highbrow sort of stuff. I'm not going to win Nobel Prizes or Booker Prizes or stuff like that. But I like to try and tell a good story, and one where I feel that people become engaged with the characters, become engaged with the ideas underneath the story, and also sometimes, try and perhaps learn something about things that they didn't know about. And so I suppose I get I don't know about compelled. If I'm compelled, I don't know what else to do. Basically, I don't play golf. I don't play bridge. I mean, what else am I going to do? you know,
Mm.
and as I said, I'm very lucky that I can do it and get published. Because
Yeah.
most people are always scrambling around. They might write, but they'll never, they won't, and I'm write much better than me, but not get published. And in recent years, my sort of ambition was to do what I'm doing now, which is to live in Spain and to write and send it off to somebody who will publish it. And I just want my work to be available. That's all I want these days. You can walk into Waterstones, or you can order online or whatever, and Blackwell's or something in Edinburgh or something, and the book will be there, and that's great for me. And that's all I ask.
Right, and so going back to your central character in this book, Carl, I mean, he gets this burning ambition that he wants to work in broadcast.
Yeah.
And he's quite resilient, and he perseveres, and it's not always easy for him. But in the end, he gets this kind of coveted position to be a presenter and interviewer. And I just wondered, does he? I guess both in Britain and in America, our presenters or our interviewers have sometimes become more about being a personality and a star than the subject sometimes that they're interviewing. Does Carl want that, or does he feel trapped by that?
I think it's a bit of both, actually. I think he always wanted. I mean, like I said, he kind of inherited these values of social justice from his grandmother, and so I think so he's got that agenda to push. He's quite fortunate he ends up with in a network in the US where he's allowed free reign, and so he's allowed to exploit that kind of aspect of it. So there's something political about him, but also, I think he wants the fame as well. And I think when you look at all of these interviewers, the famous ones, I mean, they're all pretty big personalities. I'm funny, we were talking just before we went on air this now, about Michael Parkinson and whether or not he was a big personality or whether he just sat back and let everyone talk. So, but I think these days, when I think of, I mean, in the UK now, there isn't so much now. Graham Norton is kind of, who else is doing talk show? The One Show or something. I don't know. I don't watch so much television anymore. I mean, who are the interviewers in the?
Oh, there's Jonathan Ross is still on the go.
Jonathan Ross is not he's kind of lost it a little bit. But I mean, even the Dimblebees and the the David Attenborough and so on. Don't really get that much anymore.
They tend to be within the news or within
Emily Maitlis. She was that podcast that they do. I can't remember what it's called. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. Yes,
that's very good. That's very good.
She does it with it used to be the BBC's Washington correspondent thing.
Sopel. John Sopel.
That's
John
right.
Sopel, that's right. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. So going back to novel writing, are there any particular writers that have influenced your work, David?
I mean, I guess when I was starting out, there was always people. I always used to look to Martin Amis for dialogue. If I when I started off and I had to write dialogue, I would pick up Money or London Fields or something by Martin Amis and just flick through to some dialogue, and his dialogue is just always so sharp and scathing and so it's close to the bone and authentic. So I would look to him, but I don't. I mean, I've just Tim Winton. I don't know if you know Tim Winton, the Australian writer. he's one of my favorites, and I've just read his latest book, and I didn't particularly like it. But no, I don't. I think I've found my voice now, my own voice. I don't really pay attention to what other people are doing. I'm not sure I'm that happy with the voice that I found, but it's the one.
Why is that? That's an
The one that
interesting.
I've stuck with. Sorry.
That's an interesting comment. Why is that?
Well, I think I would love to be a more to be more profound, writer. I'd like to be more distinguished writing, or something, But I find myself. I mean, I've got one novel, the Japanese one, The Exquisite Sense of What Is Beautiful, is probably my best work. But since then, I've kind of just enjoyed telling stories, and I try to throw in sort of deeper meanings and thoughts about life and so on, but I can't help but letting a bit of humor come into it, and and just, I don't know, just telling trying to make the stories interesting rather than deeply intellectual, or
I think what I found reading this book, I mean, as I say, I really enjoyed it, was that to an extent it's character-led as well. You create these
yeah.
characters that are very, very rounded, and they
Yeah, no,
feel
the
very,
yeah.
very real. Can you mention that maybe a couple of the other characters that in the book? Because
Yeah, well, there's his neighbor Penny,
yes,
who lives a sort of half a mile down the road in her own cabin, and she's a kind of really strong woman, sort of out sort of woods woman, or woods person. She's out there sort of marinating tent poles and growing her own vegetables, and living off the land, and she's a very strong woman, a very strong character. And then there's his agent Hank, his long suffering agent, and old friend from high school. And then there's a talk show host, a radio talk show host, a sort of right-wing talk show host from his high school days, who's out to get him as well. And there's the interview, the woman, the sort of journalist, the sort of Spanish American woman that comes to interview him as well in his cabin, and then out at the White Place in New Mexico. So yeah, there's quite a few characters there.
and that theme of high school never ends. To an extent, is what brings in some of these characters, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I mean, what the hardest section of the book that I had to write was that he has a year in American high school, and obviously I haven't lived I didn't go to American high school, and I didn't want to be cliche. It's so easy to sort of, I'm sure any of us listening this now could sort of make up a story about American high school, because we've seen it sort of all on TV and in movies and so on. It was very difficult to try and write about this and not be cliched, or just make up all the usual stuff. And but one of the things I did discover when doing sort of research into that was American high school is so different from anything that we experience in the UK. It's I mean, I don't know about anybody who's listening, but I mean, for me, I mean, I went to grammar school in Glasgow, and pretty much when school was over, I went, I mean, over for the day. I mean, I went home and went out with my friends and my life. I had another life outside school. Whereas in America, high school is their life. I mean, they live in high school. They're spending all their time there. Those are their friends. They go to all the all the sporting occasions, all the events. They'll go and support their friends and so on. I mean, unless I went to a completely different school, we didn't do that. I mean, people went off to play rugby and they went off to play cricket. You didn't go and support them. But in America, that's what they did. It's their whole life. It's their social life inside, well, within school, inside and outside school hours. So it's very, very different. So in a way, it doesn't end. You know, high school never ends for them because the friendships and the life that they had there, a lot of it will continue far more into their adulthood than perhaps it might for us in the UK.
I don't want to give too much away, but there's an incident that is the reason why Carl ends up in America at high school. Do you think at the high school he was a bit outside the circle, or did he feel, you know, a bit isolated?
Well, I mean, a bit yes and no for that, because being a Brit or a Scot as he was in an American high school is quite an exotic. It was quite an exotic thing. So in some ways he was outside the norm, but he was also kind of, you know, people were curious about him and you know and you know were interested to know him and ask him questions about, you know, having tea with the Queen and the Bay City Rollers or whatever else was going on at that time. And so he was a bit exotic, I suppose. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but I mean, American high schools can be very insular. And so if you do have someone from, you know, Scotland turning up, that's quite something. So I think, you know, his own circle of friends in high school was, you know, he was taking drugs. I mean, he was smoking a lot of dope in high school. In the early 80s. So he was part of that gang, the Stoners, you know. There was all these different sort of groups within the high school year, and that was his group because, well, again, I don't want to give too much away, but what happened that led him to being in the high school in the first place was something he was probably trying to escape from, and smoking marijuana was one of those ways of escaping.
And I guess escaping is another theme of the novel. He's there because he's escaping from something, and when when he goes to the American South, he's escaping from something.
Hopeless character. Hopeless.
Well, I think that's something people enjoy in drama or fiction, don't they?
I mean, to go back to what I was saying about, you know, storytelling and you know, like I always feel that my Japanese book was my best, sort of most profound novel, and then the rest are kind of hopefully engaging stories. I've actually had very good feedback on this novel that's made me think, oh, this is maybe better than I think it is. So I'm not sure. Sometimes you don't know the worth of your own work, I suppose. But anyway, I hope people that are listening, if you do go on to read it, you'll feel the same thing.
You know, you talk about being profound. I mean, I think because the characterization is strong and what's going on in them, and that has its own profoundness, or you know, whatever. You know, that there's a lot of internal stuff.
The Herald did a review of it, and they were saying that.
I'd like to ask you one more thing. In your bio, you describe yourself as a digital nomad. Can you tell us a bit about being a digital nomad? When did that happen and why?
It's just another way of saying I'm homeless. That's basically what it is. I feel that I've been a digital nomad for a lot longer than 7 years, and in fact I don't want to boast or anything, but I actually think that I might have even discovered the term, because I mean I was using it like, you know, 15 or 20 years ago. Now it's become it's become a popular term, because I was doing a lot of journalism then, as well as writing and traveling around and working at the same time, and you know, having access to the internet is what's changed things for people, especially young people. You know, I mean, it's a bit ridiculous for me, you know, that I'm still wandering the world and settling down somewhere and working digitally, remotely for a while. And in fact, I think the BBC interviewed me for an article on being a digital nomad, and then a few weeks after that, the BBC radio phoned me up because of that article, because they said we wanted to get your opinion on what's, and this Swedish company have just launched this ship for 2,000 digital nomads, right? And you go around the world and you join the ship for about, minimum of 6 months, and you'll get, you get your own cabin, and you'll get a workspace and guaranteed super broadband or whatever, and you'll be with all these 2,000 people going around the world, and they're all doing the same thing, working remotely. What do you think of that? Is what they said to me. And I said, I can't think of anything worse than traveling around the world with 2,000 people working away on their computers or whatever. So needless to say, I didn't make it to to being a contributor on that program. But it's very popular now, being a digital nomad. And I mean, maybe not so much now, because after COVID, I kind of settled down a little bit more. But I used to love going to a city like Hanoi or somewhere in Vietnam, and renting an apartment for 3 or 4 weeks, and spending half the day working and spending half the day exploring a new place. And I found that very, very satisfying, because I don't like just traveling, which I have done, because I get bored, seeing other people's lives in a way. And there's also a lot of downtime when you're traveling, and so it's good to be able to work and travel. Apart from this, you're paying for the trip, nothing else. So I've always enjoyed that, and nowadays, I mean, even in Spain now, you can get a digital nomad visa. I mean, there's specific visas now for people to go and work remotely. Yeah, I think there's something like 45 or 50 countries in the world now are offering digital nomad visas, for mainly to attract younger people to come and live and work there.
Interesting. And I guess you're in good company, because a lot of writers find that traveling is the stimulus for their work, going way back. Robert Louis Stevenson, for example, also has people, Graham Greene, Hemingway.
Yeah.
So
Robert Louis Stevenson, as much as I love like his writing, he's Kidnapped and Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The great thing about Stevenson is how much he traveled. Yes. Because he was not a well person. And yet if you had a look at what he did in his life, you would be balking at that now. I mean, he went to America a couple of times. He had to go on a steamship or something, and then cross America by train, and then went to Australia a couple of times, and Hawaii, and of course he wrote a lot of nonfiction about his travels. Yeah. He was the first travel writer, supposedly. The Travels with My Donkey, I think. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Yes. Anyway, and I did think about doing that, by the way. I did check it out. Getting a donkey. Yeah, getting a donkey and going across the Cevennes in the south of France, in the footsteps of Robert Louis Stevenson, because I did follow Stevenson's journey to Samoa when I was a digital nomad. Am I right in thinking you got a Robert Louis Stevenson fellowship? Yeah, yes, that was what inspired it, actually. Yeah, which allowed you to go to live in France and work where he lived and met his wife. But I thought about going over. So I was sort of going off piste here a bit, but I did think about taking a donkey over the Cevennes in the footsteps of Robert Louis Stevenson, and so which is a thing you can do. I mean, it's not like I'm just turning up and looking for a donkey. You can, it's an organized thing. And when I saw pictures of it, like 6 or 7 people on donkeys trailing through a village, I just thought, no, that's not how I imagined it. Oh, go on, David. Go and do it and write about it. Yeah, well, it's already been written about. He's already written about it. I just thought it was a bit too touristy. It was like it become a Disney kind of thing now. Anyway, there you go. Well, look, David, thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk about your book and your work. No, thank you for inviting me and allowing me to rant along here.